Hey, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jared Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On this week's episode, I am talking with the London-based book designer and typographer, Francisca Monteiro. This is an interesting conversation because, as many of you know, this podcast started as part of my graduate thesis while I was studying at the Maryland Institute College of Art, where I was thinking about design criticism and the relationship between design and writing and just generally how we talk about graphic design. And while I was thinking about those things in Baltimore, Francisca was also thinking about them in London, where she was working on an MA at the University of Reading. Her dissertation looked at Emigre magazine and its role in design discourse and the connections between designing and editing and the role of design criticism, which culminated in a show that she curated with Rick Poynter on the influence of Emigre. And I was just really struck by the similarities in our research and how we were researching the same ideas on different sides of the world. And so we use that as a frame to talk about our projects and our shared interest in design criticism, as well as the role of the magazine in creating a discourse, how graphic design writing has evolved over the years, and how reading Robin Kinross got her interested in design criticism. It's a really, really interesting conversation. Remember, if you're a fan of the podcast and want to help support it, you can become a member for $5 a month or $50 a year to receive an exclusive monthly newsletter with additional content and episode previews. Memberships really help keep the podcast going. I just really appreciate all of that support and hope that you enjoy this conversation with Francisca Monteiro. I was introduced to your work and to you through your, basically, I guess, your MA dissertation, which was kind of about design criticism and design writing. And you were studying that around the same time that I was in grad school studying the same topic. And we're on opposite sides of the world. And I thought that was very interesting. And so I was curious where that interest, I kind of want to start right there and then we can kind of go back in time, but where'd your interest in design criticism or design writing or the intersection of design and writing come from?
I think I started with a very big interest in legibility and readability. Mm-hmm. And so that my first reading with that in mind, with that mindset, was Kinross's Modern Typography. Oh, yeah. And he has a little segment about the legibility wars. Mm-hmm. And that led me to Emigre. And from Emigre, I wrote a little bit about Emigre. And I had the opportunity to read I didn't read everything, but almost all of the issues. And from all of those writings, that's where design criticism and all this interest came.
And this was this while you were at University of Reading, or was this all happening before that?
It was a little bit before. Okay. And that was the reason why I went to Reading.
You went to Reading to kind of study this topic specifically, or
yes,
why go back to school?
And so I was working in Lisbon in a studio, and I graduated from my BA in 2012. Okay. And then I was working in a graphic design studio, but very much focused on print design. We were doing book design, type design, exhibition design, fairly traditional. Mm-hmm. So very much traditional, with a lot of attention to the letter forms and details. So I was very interested in legibility. Mm-hmm. What is this? How can we design this transparent typography that Beatrice Ward was thinking about? Yeah. What is this? And that's when I started. I was still working, and then that's when I started to researching a little bit more about that, and then I ended up reading the Bible, Modern Typography.
Yeah.
and I was and so King Ross talks about the Macintosh and how the technology influenced the letters and the pages,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously he talks about Emigre, and by now I already applied to Reading.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, when we get to Reading University, I did a MA in
Right.
book design in Reading. It's Reading is an amazing place with amazing collections and people that you can talk to a
Right.
lot.
Yeah.
I mean, brilliant minds. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Uh,
So when you went back to school and when you were studying this, when you were kind of studying this, thinking that you were going to go back and go back to school, did you have any background in writing or theory or criticism, or what was it about this idea of legibility and kind of Emigre versus kind of Crystal Goblet?
Scotland, yeah.
Like, why did you even feel like you had to read that or study that? Where'd that
Um,
kind of come from?
my background is completely different. I studied before graphic design. I studied architecture.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I only did 2 years. I didn't do my third year.
Okay.
I changed to graphic design, so I didn't finish the degree. So, but I think my first interest in this transparent typography probably came from architecture, from geometry, from technical drawing, and very structured grids and everything. And then when I started reading more, I discovered the opposite. I
Mm.
discovered postmodernism and Emigre, and I couldn't understand it at
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
I didn't know what that was, and that fascinates me, not knowing things. So I kind of
Yeah.
looked for more and more, and I had the chance of Reading University was interested when I was in Reading. They were interested in buying an entire collection of Emigre, and obviously looking to the magazines. That's amazing compared to just looking it online or just reading
Mm-hmm.
about it. So I had a chance of looking at to those uh, page experimentations, all of those,
Yeah.
because that was all new
Yeah.
when they were doing it, all of those digital typefaces, etc.
So when you were there, and the first time I came across your work was when you and Rick Poynter staged an exhibition kind of about Emigre and about the influence of Emigre. Was that was while you were a student, right?
Yes, I was. I was. So I did a little bit before the exhibition. I did an essay, a small essay
Okay.
about Emigre and how we could position how we were positioning Emigre as a product of authorship. So
Mm.
following this 80s and 90s war, legibility war,
Yeah.
um, which was not an actual legibility war. So we are talking about obviously the experimentation that was happening
Right.
in the pages, putting the designer as the central figure, contesting neutrality. Sorry, I can't say this word properly.
Neutrality.
Neutrality.
Yeah.
Yeah. Contesting this neutrality, questioning what is the role of the graphic designer. And Emigre, in most of the literature about postmodernism, Emigre is given as the example of postmodern aesthetic. So I wrote an essay about Emigre, and Rick Poynter joined the typography department a little bit later, and it all made sense to do an exhibition about it because it was once in a lifetime opportunity.
Yeah. Well,
That was
what's interesting about that, and kind of hearing you talk about that, and correct me if this is maybe a wrong interpretation of your approach, is that you were originally drawn to Emigre kind of for stylistic purposes, because the way it looked, this kind of idea of kind of breaking the grid and that sort of thing. But you as you were studying it, it kind of got bigger and a little more theoretical, where you started talking about the designer as author and kind of what it means for a designer to be an editor, which isn't just stylistically anymore, but it was kind of a whole new way of working or a whole new approach to design. How did that, you know, I would love to kind of hear your thought process or your research process of kind of being intrigued by this thing purely stylistically and then realizing that there were other things about it that were interesting or other things you could talk about.
Yeah, so it's definitely that. I was attracted to postmodernism and Emigre because it was against everything I thought I believed in. And
Yeah.
I was practicing. I was very well. I probably am, but I was working in a very traditional studio. I was trying to understand again the crystal goblet, and working towards this transparent typography.
Right.
Then an entire new world opens up, and I want to understand what's happening. Why are these arrangements and references affecting the message? Why are they doing that? And what can that brings? Obviously, those differences, those hierarchy, those levels of information that mold the way the reader reads the text, and that's fascinating. Compared, I'm not saying that invisible typography, it's
right,
something like that. It's just two different fascinating approaches or ideas. So that's why I looked into the designer as author, post-structuralism. I end up obviously in checking the what was happening at Cranbrook and Color Arts. All of those, they were obviously confronting critical theory, post-structuralism with graphic design.
Yeah. So was all this, kind of thinking about deconstruction and post-structuralism and this kind of more theoretical side? Did you have any background in that, or were you kind of using Emigre as your way to also learn about these things?
I had absolutely zero background.
Okay.
Completely. I didn't know. I didn't even know Emigre when I finished my BA. So so when I read all of this back then, when I was reading this was all new and fascinating because I didn't know it existed. So I didn't have absolutely any kind of background on this.
Okay.
Which I think, and Emigre was my case study for everything.
Yeah.
Everything I was reading, I was going back and checking. Oh, really? Yeah, that's true.
Right. Yeah. Well, the reason I ask is because I feel like I had a very similar kind of experience where in my undergrad, and I guess we were kind of probably studying this around the same time. I finished undergrad in 2011, so a little bit before you, but Emigre was a thing that we were introduced to, and the kind of 1990s kind of postmodernism. But words like post-structuralism or deconstruction, even like the word postmodern, I don't think was ever, I'm not sure that was a word that was used to describe those in the school I went to. And these were shown to us purely as different visual styles. There was no kind of theory or history or criticism brought in around that. And it wasn't until after I graduated and I started studying design criticism that the theoretical side of these visuals started to make more sense. And so it's the same. It sounds like it was kind of similar to you, actually.
No, yeah, exactly the same thing.
And so how, I'm curious because now you staged this show with Rick that's kind of looking at Emigre, and then you end up doing your dissertation on, and this is where it gets kind of really interesting for me, is because your dissertation is very similar to my own graduate school project, and it's about design criticism, or it's about the relationship between design and writing. So what was it about that show and about studying Emigre that started getting you interested in criticism, or how we talk about design?
Well, it started when I had the chance of reading the issues.
Yeah.
And reading, going back to those legibility wars, reading what was that about exactly? What were they talking about? They were talking about what graphic design is.
Right. Yeah.
And I wanted to know. My first question was, yes, this existed in the 80s and 90s, but what about today?
Yeah.
We don't have, and I end up going over and over again to magazine stores and trying to flick through all of the graphic designs magazines and trying to understand, okay, where is Emigre today? The Emigre of today.
Yeah.
And I couldn't realize why.
Yeah.
So that's what my dissertation was, picking up from Emigre, but was looking at designer-led publications, so publications that were edited and designed by designers, like Emigre, and see what does that give us, and where can we see that happening again today? Where can we see that community that Emigre built?
Yeah.
Unity of readers, of discussion. Where can we see that today?
Well, and what I liked about, because I read your dissertation in preparation for this, is that you talk about how this idea of designer-led publications, or this kind of design dialogue, or this kind of critical discourse around design, didn't start with Emigre. It existed before. There were magazines before Emigre that did this, and there were magazines after Emigre that did this. And you talk about things like ... and Francisco Laranjo's Modes of Criticism. But there was something about Emigre that sort of, it was like a right place at the right time. Like it was a bunch of different things converging at the same time. And I'm kind of curious, as someone, you approached your project a little bit more historical, I think, than I did. And I'm curious, kind of studying that history. I have two questions. Do you also agree that that Emigre kind of hit on a lot of things at the same time? The introduction of the Macintosh, the introduction of theory at Cranbrook, and was able to kind of grab onto that. And then, are there something I think about all the time, and it comes up on this podcast all the time, is this idea of, the legibility wars, the introduction of the Macintosh, is what led to that kind of critical writing. Are there things like that today that are happening that we're just missing? Are there actual kind of big cultural things like that that would lend itself to that kind of writing and debate and quote, war? You know what I mean?
No, I think they are different. From Emigre, from the 80s and the 90s, and new technologies, and then the blogs and internet and everything, graphic design as a field was completely transformed. And I remember listening to your conversation with Jeffrey Kitty. It's amazing. I remember him saying that graphic design today is so big. It's a book, but it's a UI, UX at the same time. So it's so big that the discourse itself, it's very broad as well. So it's difficult to find one place where everyone goes to read and to talk and to, so I guess it expanded and it transformed. It exists. I think the interest in graphic design criticism, it exists. It didn't disappear at all. It's just adapted itself.
Right. And it's so fragmented because the field is so big that there almost can't be one central place, because there's user experience and product design and all of these things are just kind of having their own dialogues now.
Yeah, that's why I focused. So when I started actually writing the dissertation, when I stopped researching,
Yeah.
which was like 2 days before the deadline.
Right, of course.
I focused on printed magazines, printed publications. My interest was always printed publications, but because they were a meeting point for ideas and analysis and discourse, and they were in itself a critical practice.
Right.
What I'm saying is that they were a place for critical practice, and they were in itself a critical practice because they can pose questions or debate for what they are showing and how they are showing. They are claiming something and at the same time giving the information to the reader to make their own judgments and critique. So that's why I focus. I started. You were saying that I went in a little historic road. Yes, I started. I touched the avant-garde 1920s a little bit. I touched the First Things First manifesto, of course, because they kind of defined the. Well, they didn't define the limits. It's exactly the opposite. They opened the limits of the and then as a magazine, I went to Typographica, Urban Spencer Typographica. Sorry if I'm saying it incorrectly. Again, because he was the editor and the designer. Emigre, obviously, ... Because these magazines were generating a community of interests, a community of voices, and the essays that they were showing from Typographica to ... and they were showing the essays were themselves experiments and they were questioning the content, actual essays. So everything was one whole thing.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know if I answered or just ran away from the question.
Yeah, well, no, because that was actually my another question that I had is I loved how you framed this project around magazines, and this is something that I hadn't thought about it in this way until I read your project, and that magazines, and you were starting to say this in your answers, that magazines actually create a public, by publishing a magazine, you're also creating an audience, and people subscribe to it, they get it in the mail, and then it starts this kind of conversation with the reader. And I wonder, and I think early blogs did that also. Sites like Speak Up and early Design Observer did that. But I don't know if that, I think, I don't want to put all the blame on social media, but you don't go to a website as much anymore. The website the website doesn't come to you. You just go on Twitter or whatever and you just see it and you just click out on what's interesting. And so it makes it harder to kind of create that sustained public or that sustained audience.
Yeah, I think there's one, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no.
There's one thing about magazines that make it work so well. It's because when we know to whom they are talking to, we know who the reader, who the writer is, and who the reader is. It's a very direct thing. Whereas when you go to a website, you're talking to such a broader audience, or you don't have the sense of community that you have when you build a magazine. When you publish a magazine, it's a more closed structure, I think, and that allows for a more direct communication. Like
it allows for, when you publish something on the internet, basically it goes out to everybody. And so there isn't that sense of community because anyone can kind of jump in and jump out whenever they want. where that magazine has that kind of sustained audience. And so it often feels like when you publish something on the internet, and I even feel this honestly with the podcast sometimes, where I don't always know who's listening to this. And I know that there are some people that listen to every single episode, and there are some people that have probably only listened to one. And I have no way of really knowing that the way, that magazine a magazine can kind of create that dialogue between, not just between kind of writer and reader, but also like publisher and subscriber, and then the readers talk to each other, and I just don't know. It comes back to what we were saying earlier about the field getting so big. Is that kind of community even possible anymore? Like, does the form of the magazine even make sense in 2018 as a way to package and distribute design criticism?
It might make sense. I think it does, but let me just go back a little bit. There's one thing that we are missing. When we are comparing magazines with web and blogs, it's the editor. That's the main figure in all of this that makes the magazines a different product. Whereas when in blogs, yes, we drew more people in quantity to the dialogue, sure, but you have Speak Up and the early Design Observer, where you almost see the same letters to Emigre that we were seeing. You have the same kind of comments and the fiery comments in Speak Up as well, but you don't have an editor to make it a cohesive argument, something that if you go to a blog and you have an amazing piece, an amazing essay, and then you have 70, 80, 100 comments, yes, you do have a handful of very good comments that have good content, but it's so difficult to flick through all of the see more, it's difficult to find a line, a frame of reference, and I think that's the difference between the two platforms. It's the editor. The magazine has this editor, and the blog and the web, it's more difficult to provide the reader with references and frames, and I think that's the...
I have two questions. I'll ask these as separate questions. I was going to try to put two questions together, but I think it would be better to keep them separate. After you've studied this for... How long was your program? 1 year or 2 years?
I did it in 2 years.
So after studying, basically kind of studying this for 2 years, did it change how you think about graphic design?
I think, not sure how to answer. I think it changed the way I approach work, in the sense that I know how to why I want something and how to explain my decisions. I think in that way it did change how I approach my day-to-day work.
I'm asking this kind of selfishly, thinking about my own career and work, and how I feel like the more, because spending 2 years studying design criticism and reading how people have talked about design over the years, that I found that before I started graduate school, and I didn't even realize this until after, how narrow my definition of graphic design actually was. And maybe this comes back to the Keedy interview of it being kind of bigger than it's ever been, is that there are so many more ways to practice graphic design that I just kind of never realized or thought of. And it's just opened up the field, and design writing and design criticism has made graphic design so much more interesting to me. And I already found it interesting. You know, it was already the thing that I wanted to do. But kind of discovering this other side, I just feel like it kind of like completely opened up for me. Did you feel that at all?
I felt exactly the same. And to add to that, I think our generation and today, design criticism today, we need to kind of do it more so that
Yeah.
we can have new. I'm missing the word. The discourse has. We need to frame what the discourse is. We need to reframe it.
Yeah.
Because graphic design changed. So we kind of need to adapt the discourse to that change. We need to ask ourselves, what does the discourse now, the critical discourse, include or exclude? What does it mean to talk about graphic design today? What is it now?
Yeah. I have said this so many times where I feel like every generation needs to redefine what graphic design is to that generation.
But that only happens with podcasts like yours and more design conversation about design critique. Critique. So I guess the new generation, if we are aiming for that community again that we were talking in the beginning, that community interaction, we need new standards, probably new platforms.
This is exactly something that I was curious about asking you about also, because I found when I read through old Emigres, and I recently talked to Rudy, that when we're recording this, that interview hasn't come out, but by the time people listen to this one, they'll have heard that one already. So I'm sorry that that
I haven't.
That while we talk, you haven't heard it. But it's interesting to me how so much of what we think of as design criticism, or the topics that design criticism should cover, are the ones that, like, we're still living off of the energy of Emigre instead of finding those new things for today, 20 years later.
We might not even find it, but at least we are asking what that can be, and that's important too. We're even more important.
Yeah.
Even if we don't find we don't find this community again, we don't build this community again because it's just not possible. That's okay, but at least we are asking the questions, and I guess that's
I mean, it's a start. It's at least what what this podcast is trying to do, is at least try to, maybe raise some of those questions, I think. And it was nice, I don't mean to make this about me, but I was surprised and really enjoyed seeing Scratching the Surface in your essay, and it was really fascinating to me to read somebody else who has thought about this as much as I have and frame what I'm doing in that history. And what I'm hoping to do. And so it was kind of just a side note. I really enjoyed kind of seeing how you framed Scratching the Surface in this trajectory also. And it just made me feel good.
No, it's the new, it's what I was saying about is new standards for critical discourse or new platforms. If graphic design as a field expanded so much, we need to adapt to that.
Yeah.
We need to adapt to that transformation. And we need to find other ways of talking about it and defining what graphic design is.
Yeah, well, and that was kind of what I was leading to, is that's why this is a podcast, is because I thought if this was just originally when I started my MFA, I was thinking that I was going to write a series of essays or publish a book or something like that. And I was really interested in bringing more people into the discourse, and that design criticism today has, almost feels too academic sometimes. It's the kind of people in the schools, it's the thing that other people do, and then you go and you do the work. And I wanted to try to bring those together. And so I started experimenting with video and with podcasts to see, are there different formats that we could use to bring more people into that critical discourse? And that's exactly why this is a podcast. And I'm curious if what you think, especially kind of your project focusing so much on magazines, do you have thoughts on what design criticism could look like today, or what new formats we could be using to raise these issues?
I do think the podcast is an amazing new format that should be. It does make a lot of sense, but I don't want to say that the magazine as a platform for design criticism doesn't work anymore, because I do think it does. I think we obviously need editors that can be designers or visual people that with big visual culture that are not designers but that are very interested in design. We need these people to publish more magazines and try again to do something like ... did, which was amazing. So I don't think that we do need to look for more or other platforms, but the magazine it still is. I think the platform for now, it's the platform that works the best. I think that has more. I'm not sure how to say this.
It's like I don't know if this is what you're trying to say, but I'm thinking I also recently interviewed the guys from Bricks from the Kiln, which is a kind of new it feels like a daughter to ... in a lot of ways. And they're doing something that's just really interesting, and it's like a bi-yearly publication, but it's beautifully packaged. It's a set number. Like the thing that's nice about a magazine is it's packaged. There's a beginning and an end to it. The pieces might not have a whole theme. Sometimes they do have a whole theme, but it's an object, it's an artifact. And I think there's still an importance to that. I agree with you. And it's interesting talking about new forms of criticism or new forms of the discourse. How many people I've talked to for the podcast who are still publishing magazines or publications.
Yeah.
The other side of that question, though, and we've kind of danced around this a little bit, is in thinking about redefining the discourse for today. And this is a question that I ask everybody that I interview. From your vantage point, what are the topics or issues or subjects that designers should be talking about or writing about today? What are there legibility wars of 2018, or what are the issues that we should be thinking about?
That's an amazing question, but going back to the fact that graphic design is so broad and it expanded and fragmented it so much, it's difficult to just tell you 1, 2, 3. Yeah. I work in publishing, and I do have my interests are printed publications, books, magazines, etc. So my interest is always about the legibility, readability, legibility, hierarchy of information, and how do we deal with it in a printed page. So I think for me, I would focus my writing and research and discourse and conversations that I have with other people on pretty much on typography and type, because that's my background and that's what I do at the moment. So in a broader sense, what should we all be talking about? It's difficult to answer because of all we talked about. Because graphic design, what is it? It's
Yeah.
so much that it's difficult to pinpoint a topic or two or three.
Are there from your research, are there people or publications or editors or writers who you feel have picked up that mantle from Emigre and are kind of doing the interesting publication and design writing work today?
Well, you can't forget iMagazine,
Oh,
which
right.
is
Yeah.
the Emigre of today, obviously. No, I mean that's what I mean is that that's the magazine that, in my opinion, it's the magazine that it's bringing more critical writing to our field. And I don't have a lot of information. I haven't seen many, but Idea from
Oh,
Japan.
yeah. Yeah.
I haven't. Well, I have a couple of issues, and I've seen a couple of issues, but I haven't seen many, so I can't really talk about it. But from what I got, from what I read, again, they have the editor and the designer. They have a very good collaboration, which makes it a very good product. The fact that the articles are the designer has a hand in the editorial part, and the
Right.
editor has a hand in the foot in the in this. So I think that these collaborations, that happen in that kind of collaboration happens in iMagazine as well.
Yeah.
That's what makes these products so good. And probably that's the kind of thing that allows a community to be formed around it. So those are the two printed magazines that I think are doing what Typographica did, what Emigre did, what ... did.
Yeah.
And what Speak Up and Design Observer did as well.
Right. Yeah. I have two more questions to kind of wrap this up. I'm curious what's next for you. After finishing your MA, spending this time thinking about criticism and the relationship between design and writing. Has this changed how you think about your career? Do you want to do more writing? Do you want to kind of be involved in this kind of discourse that we're talking about? How did this change or evolve your own practice?
I'm not sure yet.
Okay.
I just finished last summer.
Okay.
I definitely want to be involved. I don't see myself as a writer.
Oh, really?
I wrote two or three things in an academic environment, and writing outside an academic environment. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying that I don't want to do it.
Right.
I
know
just
what you
don't
mean.
know what it is
Yeah.
because I haven't done it. So yes, I might want to do it.
Yeah. Okay.
Connect from what this is, this design discourse of today. I definitely don't want to disconnect, and I want to be part of it.
My final question is, and this is also a question that I end every interview with. Who are the writers or the critics or authors or the books or designers who have really influenced you and the way you think about this and your own project and the way you think about your work and kind of everything that we've talked about?
I think this will sound strange, but I'm going back to modern typography because it was the book that opened all of this world.
Yeah.
So I would go for it. And what I constantly read is it's iMagazine. So
yeah.
I think those are the two big printed a book and a magazine being printed matters that influences me.
Yeah.
Influence me.
Thank you so much for this conversation. This was really fun for me. I was really like I said before we started recording, I was really looking forward to talking to you because I thought there was something really fascinating that both of us kind of pursued graduate school projects that were very similar in topics at the same time, which I think means that this is something that's on people's minds right now. And it was just really interesting to me to kind of read somebody else who has thought about this as much as I have, and to talk to you and see how you approached it. So thank you so much. This was so great, and I'm glad to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.
This episode was recorded on April 14th, 2018. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.